Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 82. Chapter 82. After his interview with his wife, Pierre left for Petersburg. At the Torzhok post station, either there were no horses or the postmaster would not supply them. Pierre was obliged to wait. Without undressing, he lay down on the leather sofa in front of a round table, put his big feet in their overboots on the table, and began to reflect. "Will you have the portmanteaus brought in, and a bed ready, and tea?" asked his valet. Pierre gave no answer, for he neither heard nor saw anything. He had begun to think of the last station, and was still pondering on the same question, one so important that he took no notice of what went on around him. Not only was he indifferent as to whether he got to Petersburg earlier or later, or whether he secured accommodation at this station, but compared to the thoughts that now occupied him, it was a matter of indifference whether he remained there for a few hours or for the rest of his life. The postmaster, his wife, the valet, and a peasant woman selling Torzhok embroidery came into the room offering their services. Without changing his careless attitude, Pierre looked at them over his spectacles, unable to understand what they wanted or how they could go on living without having solved the problems that so absorbed him. He had been engrossed by the same thoughts ever since the day he returned from Soloniki after the duel and had spent that first agonizing sleepless night. But now, in the solitude of the journey, they seized him with a special force. No matter what he thought about, he always returned to these same questions which he could not solve, and yet could not cease to ask himself. It was as if the thread of the chief screw which held his life together were stripped, so that the screw could not get in or out, but went on turning uselessly in the same place. The postmaster came in and began obsequiously to beg His Excellency to wait only 2 hours, when, come what might, he would let His Excellency have the courier horses. It was plain that he was lying and only wanted to get more money from the traveler. "Is this good or bad?" Pierre asked himself. "It is good for me, bad for another traveler, and for himself it's unavoidable because he needs money for food. The man said an officer had once given him a thrashing for letting a private traveler have the courier horses. But the officer thrashed him because he had to get on as quickly as possible, and I," continued Pierre, "shot Dólokhov because I considered myself injured, and Louis XVI was executed because they considered him a criminal, and a year later they executed those who executed him, also for some reason. What is bad? What is good? What should one love and what hate? What does one live for, and what am I? What is life and what is death? What power governs all?" There were no answer to any of these questions, except one, and that not a logical answer, and not at all a reply to them. The answer was, "You'll die, and all will end. You'll die, and know all, or cease asking." But dying was also dreadful. The Torzhok peddler woman, in a whining voice, went on offering her wares, especially a pair of goatskin slippers. "I have hundreds of rubles I don't know what to do with, and she stands in her tattered cloak looking timidly at me," he thought. What does she want money for? As if that money could add a hair's breadth to happiness or peace of mind. Can anything in the world make her or me less a prey to evil and death? Death which ends all and must come today or tomorrow? At any rate, In an instant. It's all an instant compared with eternity. And again he twisted the screw with the stripped thread, and again it turned uselessly in the same place. His servant handed him a half-cut novel, in the form of letters by Madame de Souza. He began reading about the sufferings and virtuous struggles of a certain Emilie de Mansfield. And why did she resist her seducer when she loved him, he thought. God could not have put it into her heart an impulse that was against his will. My wife, as she once was, did not struggle, and perhaps she was right. Nothing has been found out, nothing discovered, Pierre said again to himself. All we can know is that we know nothing, and that is the height of human wisdom. Everything within and around him seemed confused, senseless, and repellent. Yet in this very repugnance to all his circumstances, Pierre found a kind of tantalizing satisfaction. I make bold to ask your excellency to move a little for this gentleman, said the postmaster, entering the room followed by another traveler, also detained for lack of horses. The newcomer was a short, large-boned, yellow-faced, wrinkled old man, with gray, bushy eyebrows overhanging bright eyes of an indefinite grayish color. Pierre took his feet off the table, stood up, and lay down on a bed that had been got ready for him, glancing now and then at the newcomer, who, with a gloomy and tired face, was warily taking off his wraps with the aid of his servant, and not looking at Pierre. With a pair of felt boots on his thin, bony legs, and keeping on a worn, Nanshield-covered sheepskin coat, the traveler sat down on the sofa, leaned back his big head with its broad temples and close-cropped hair, and looked at Bezukhov. The stern, shrewd, and penetrating expression of that look struck Pierre. He felt a wish to speak to the stranger, but by the time he had made up his mind to ask him a question about the roads, the traveler had closed his eyes. His shriveled old hands were folded, and on the finger of one of them Pierre noticed a large cast-iron ring with a seal representing a death's head. The stranger sat without stirring, either resting or, as it seemed to Pierre, sunk in profound and calm meditation. His servant was also a yellow, wrinkled old man, without beard or mustache, evidently not because he was shaven, but because they had never grown. This active old servant was unpacking the traveler's canteen and preparing tea. He brought in a boiling samovar. When everything was ready, the stranger opened his eyes, moved to the table, filled the tumbler with tea for himself, and one for the beardless old man to whom he passed it. Pierre began to feel a sense of uneasiness, and the need, even the inevitability, of entering into conversation with this stranger. The servant brought back his tumbler, turned upside down, and with an unfinished bit of nibbled sugar, and asked if anything more would be wanted. "No, give me the book," said the stranger. The servant handed him a book which Pierre took to be a devotional work, and the traveler became absorbed in it. Pierre looked at him. All at once the stranger closed the book, putting in a marker, and again, leaning with his arms on the back of the sofa, sat in his former position with his eyes shut. Pierre looked at him, and had not time to turn away when the old man, opening his eyes, fixed his steady and severe gaze straight on Pierre's face. Pierre felt confused and wished to avoid that look, but the bright old eyes attracted him irresistibly. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 82. Hope you liked it. I'll now proceed to my reading of my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 82. The Stranger. Few things in world literature seem to provoke the great metaphysical questions of existence quite like shooting a man. To take just one example, we have the absurd story of Marcel. That poor bastard shoots a man to death on an Algerian beach while suffering from what appears to be the delirium of sunstroke. Before the shooting, nothing moves Marcel's self-awareness, not even the death of his mother, watching a comedy movie, or vigorous sex with a French girl named Marie. It's only after the shooting that Marcel engages in any deep thinking about the world. His conclusion, reached after a particularly animated exchange with a prison chaplain, is that one can be happy only after accepting the gentle indifference of the world. Pierre Bezukhov is halfway there. He's already shot a guy. Now he's alone at a post station contemplating life. He's asking himself what is good, what is bad, who should he love, what should we hate, what do we live for, but he can't answer these questions. Tolstoy writes, "There is no answer to any of these questions except one, and that not a logical answer, and not at all a reply to them. The answer was, you'll die, and all will end. You'll die and know all, or cease asking." But dying was also dreadful. As you can see, Pierre is just on the verge of leaping into Marsan's infinite abyss of absurdity and meaninglessness when a stranger takes a seat next to him at the post station. The stranger is an old man. He settles himself into a seat and starts to read what appears to be a devotional book of some sort. Pierre can't take his eyes off the man. The stranger notices this, closes his book, and fixes his stare upon Pierre in return. Part of Pierre's charm is his constant mercurial yearning. We've seen since the beginning of the novel that he's a curious and inquisitive fellow. These questions he asks himself today are important, probably the most important questions we can ask ourselves. It's the seeking of the answers to these questions that guide him, albeit elusively, through the remainder of the novel. It's a pity it takes the shooting of a man and a failed marriage to get him to the point where he starts asking himself these questions and wanting to find out the answers so he can live a virtuous life. Imagine all the time he lost by not asking sooner. So let's not be like Marsan and Pierre and wait until we've shot someone to start thinking philosophically. Much better, as a group of hardcore New York philosophers once suggested, to start today. Daily meditation. We ought to consider not only that our life is daily wasting away and a smaller part of it is left, but another thing also should be taken into account. That if a man should live longer, it is quite uncertain whether the understanding will still continue sufficient for the comprehension of things, and retain the power of contemplation, which strives to acquire the knowledge of the divine and the human. For if he shall begin to fall into dotage, perspiration and nutrition and imagination and appetite, and whatever else there is of the kind, will not fail. But the power of making use of ourselves, and filling up the measure of our duty, and clearly separating all appearances, and considering whether a man should now depart from life, and whatever else of the kind absolutely requires a disciplined reason, all that is already extinguished. We must make haste then, not only because we are daily nearer to death, but also because the conception of things and the understanding of them cease first. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, so that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 82 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did. I like this chapter a lot. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are below in the show notes. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 83 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and of others.